Ladies and gentlemen, the Kids in the Room podcast. Kids in the Room podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV. Let's go.
All right. Hey guys, what's going on today? We've got Dom Einhorn today, who is on our show. Dom is an investor, an angel investor, right? How you doing, Dom?
That's it.
Awesome.
That's it. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So how would you officially, introduce yourself? Like, what would you say your core background is?
Well, I'm originally from France. I'm half French, half German. I'm from the northeastern part of France, in the Alsace-Lorraine, which was a region that's pretty interesting. It was kicked back and forth between France and Germany for hundreds of centuries, right? So we're a strange breed of human beings, I say, Part of us descendants from the Vikings because around the 800 Charlemagne area, we had a big invasion of Vikings in our area, and obviously there were a lot of things happening at that point in time. And interestingly enough, before the show started, you actually asked me about that specifically, and I told you that I had my DNA checked not too long ago, and my mom's DNA comes from Norway, Finland, from those times, right?
Right.
Which was the only way to explain it. But the way I introduced myself, I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost, turned investor over the last 6 to 8 years. I moved from France to the U.S., to your town, Los Angeles, where I lived almost 25 years, primarily in Santa Monica, California. I had a number of digital media startups that I launched in the U.S., some of which failed, some of which were successful. I had more failures than successes, but the successes made up for the many failures, fortunately.
Always.
And I'd say in the last 6 to 8 years, I've morphed more into an angel investor assisting other entrepreneurs inside our incubator here in France. It's actually the largest rural incubator in the world, Unicorn with a Q,
right.
Unicorn Incubator. And what we do today is we help young entrepreneurs in the tech scene become successful. We basically incubate and accelerate them. So for those of you who don't know what an incubator is, think incubator in the hospital. The reason why they exist is to ensure the survivability of a baby. We do exactly the same thing for young entrepreneurs.
Right, you guys do, definitely, for sure. And that's interesting that you touched on your surname, which is Einhorn, being Viking. I automatically, noticed that immediately. I have a great-grandfather who was a Grimmett, which is a Viking surname. So it stands for like the grim one, like the scary one. So it must have been like somewhere down the line. I guess he was a really intimidating Viking somewhere down there. So that's where that surname
could well
comes
be,
from.
yeah. My last name in German, it means unicorn, hence one of the reasons why we named the incubator Unicorn, aside from the fact that obviously if you're a startup entrepreneur, a unicorn is also a company that's valued at least $1 billion or more.
Wow, that's true. Unicorn. Okay, I see. Oh, I got that. That was good. That was definitely good.
Double play.
That was unique, man. That was unique, Dom. So right now you said you're in Los Angeles right now, or are you in France?
I'm in the south of France, southwest of France, very close to Bordeaux, which the big wine region. So we're about 2 hours east of Bordeaux being right on the coast.
Sweet. Wow. And you said part of your family lives in the United States, or was that correct or incorrect?
My daughter's in LA. Everybody else is here in Europe.
Wow, that's awesome.
True blue European.
These are the facts for sure, man. So south of France. What's it like in south of France in the startup scene and in general?
It's getting very busy. I'd say historically, south of France was not known for startups. It was known for good food, good wines, et cetera, which fortunately we still have. And basically, what you can do over here these days is you can combine both. So I'd say great way of life, amazing nature, low stress environment.
Right.
While at the same time being able to build amazing businesses the same way you would in LA without a lot of the hassle. One of the reasons why I moved back, for me, traffic is a 2-minute walk to the office. It's no longer hitting the 405 south or north and being stuck in traffic forever.
Yeah, that's not going to happen in LA for sure. definitely not going to happen in life.
Not anytime soon.
What'd you say?
Not anytime soon.
Nah,
At least.
I mean, I think Elon Musk is working on that, but other than that, I think that's about it. Yeah, definitely not changing. A lot of people. There's been this big diaspora out of L.A. Right?
Well, you got a lot of, obviously, the big city, like any big city, a lot of influx, a lot of outflux. You know, I left LA with my wife, who is Vietnamese American. She was born and raised, not born, raised in LA, but from the age of 7 and up. And when we left, we said, look, we're not going to leave LA to go to Paris. We're not going to repeat the same thing on the French side, right? So we went to a small town. I'm in a town called Sarlat, Sarlat, for those of you who want to look it
And
up.
want to visit?
It's a medieval town. Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a full-on medieval town. It's like walking straight into the 12th century.
Wow.
And you walk into town.
I'm definitely going.
Yeah. You'd be amazed. The architecture straight from the Gremlins.
Wow.
Right? So if you look it up, type in, do Google search for Sarlat, Sarlat, France, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Sweet. I bet you there's a lot of history there that's still up with the castles and cathedrals and things like that from between France and Spain.
Castles. We in a 25-mile radius, we have 1,001 medieval castles. It's the highest density of castles anywhere.
Wow, that's amazing. It's pretty cool for all the people that love that, like me. That's pretty cool. It's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
Exciting. So you said you also invested in some, some different startups. Some failed, some succeed, etc. What kind of startups do you invest into? Like, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done, as an angel investor, probably between 20 and 25 investments to date in startups. We only do tech. When I say tech, basically artificial intelligence, fintech, AR, VR, digital media, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we understand. We have a general rule of not investing into anything we do not understand.
Right.
We have 7 startups we're incubating at this moment. We're roughly 30 people in the team that actually helps those startups, consisting of finance guys, graphic designers, developers, digital marketers, social media managers, etc. So we basically build an ecosystem that supports young entrepreneurs and young ventures and helps them succeed.
Right. That's pretty sweet. So what are some of the challenges of doing that?
Challenges are many, right? And actually, that's probably the very reason why we exist, is because if you don't provide that type of support for an early stage venture, the failure rate is sky high, right? So the biggest challenge is to always make sure that you're drafting real talent that has a good combination of high IQ, high EQ. You gotta, as an entrepreneur, you gotta be a hustler. There's no secret. Yeah. Or if you're not a hustler, you gotta have a hustler on your team, right? If you're a geek, find a hustler. If you're a hustler, find a geek. That's kind of like what I usually like to say. But great teams consist of specialists, not generalists. What I mean by that is that the last person I need on my team is another me. I don't need someone who taps me on the back either and says, good job, right? You need to be constantly challenged. Yeah. And the biggest challenge is to know and learn how to overcome failure.
Wow.
As quickly as possible. Right? Depending on which culture you grew up in, obviously America is different than Europe and other parts of the world, where failure is somewhat accepted. In certain cases, even embraced. That's not true in most cultures. Right? In some cultures, you have this huge stigma. Oh my God, he tried something and he failed. Right? Finger pointing, et cetera, and that can be very intimidating for a young entrepreneur. But what you're learning is that a failure is actually a stepping stone to success. So unless you're embracing failure, there's no way you're going to succeed.
Gotta embrace that failure.
Exactly. So one example for that would be the late Thomas Edison, when the media back in the days asked him why he had succeeded where so many else had failed by creating the light bulb. He basically said, I finally ran out of things that didn't work. So what that means is that, he ran out of failures. He tried so many times that he had no choice but to succeed. So I think for all young entrepreneurs listening into the show, I think that's, really the test you got to do is, do you have what it takes to become an entrepreneur?
Right.
And are you willing to put up with the pain and the failures and the downs, because you're going to have them?
Yeah.
And I think there's also a big fallacy in that sense, where a lot of people think that they have what it takes, but they just don't. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nothing wrong with actually looking at yourself in the mirror and says, you know what? I'm not willing to put up with that.
Right.
Right? And I'm better off as an employee. I'm better off as an artist. I'm better off as whatever.
Right.
There's plenty of room for everyone.
Yes, there is, for sure.
Because in my experience, I can tell you that maybe 1 out of 20 people in this world have what it takes to be an entrepreneur. They're willing to get knocked down and get back up. They're willing to potentially lose friendship over it, lose the financial resources and risk everything, right? If you're in the IP world, of getting sued and being able to fight your way through it for whatever reason, right? You have to be able to, basically look at, stare adversity in the face and say, you know what? I'm not scared of you. You walk away. I'm staying, right? And that's what it takes to be successful.
No, you're 100% right. It does take an immense amount of resilience, determination.
Yeah.
You also have to have, I think that all kicks back into what you just touched on a lot, which is that hustle, that drive, no matter what comes in, your vicinity, you're consistently just finding another way around it, right? You have to be nimble. You have to be quick. You have to be almost like a cat, have those 9 lives automatically in your mind and just maneuver back and forth. Don't let those failures set you back. You have to just keep on pushing and going, even when it looks like it's not going to come into fruition or anything else like that. I think that's imperative.
No question, and I think touched upon something very important. Is you got to keep pushing. Look, the bottom line is, if you're an entrepreneur, that means you have a product or service you either have on the market already or that you intend to bring to market.
Right.
Unless that product or service responds to a need in the marketplace, unless you provide a solution to a problem, you have no point being in business.
Facts.
Right? And very often that's what a lot of entrepreneurs, or want to be entrepreneurs, tend to forget these days. They're just shooting down. They have a passion, but that passion is not necessarily aligned with a need in the marketplace. Right. Just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean you're providing a bona fide solution to an existing problem. In fact, what we're seeing quite often these days are people inventing a problem and then trying to bring the solution, right? And that's ultimately going to fail. That's not durable. There are plenty of problems that everybody is facing in the world still today, less every day, fortunately, but there's still plenty of them where you can zero in and say, you know what, I'm going to alleviate that pain point. I'm going to remove that friction from the process, et cetera, et cetera. Once you actually do that, that's when you're actually really catering to a need, and that's how you become successful.
Right. I think you brought up a lot of things. You brought up a lot of valid, context and discussion points. But I think at some point, is it subjective in some sense, right? Because if it is that easy and scalable to kind of comprehend who's going to be that successful unicorn, wouldn't every investor hop on? I think there's some key signals that investors and people of like kind of look at and then try to gravitate towards that and hone in and say, okay, I have faith that this, or I believe that this is going to be a valid investment or worth my risk. But in actuality, it may not be so transparent at first, right? Because there's a lot of things that weren't so transparent, right? Or a lot of investors would be, like all billionaires, right? Like, there's, WhatsApp, Facebook, was reluctant to, well, wasn't even reluctant. They didn't hire him, right? And then they bought WhatsApp back for what? Almost like 14 and 19 billion or some sense of a number around that area. After you get that point, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I think the key what you're looking for is traction, right? So that's also why a lot of investors don't get involved at the seed stage, because that's the riskiest.
Right.
When the product is actually not on the market yet. So, right, we actually do the opposite. We're willing to take that risk because we've done it before and we understand what we can do in terms of bringing value in order to make it happen. Now, can we fail? Absolutely can we fail, but we're basically taking a calculated gamble, knowing that the value that we bring to an existing team, is usually the difference maker between success and failure. We've still no ultimate guarantee of success, but we have a real measurable impact on the potential of that company. If you just left them by the wayside, if you left them on their own, hence the word incubator, they just die, they just wither away.
Now, I wanted to touch on, how do you objectively just go in there, and choose that investment? Because sometimes, it may just be like, this is, ultimately it is almost opinion based. How do you, what are the key things that you kind of tune in to say, okay, I believe this is a safe investment? I heard that hustle, right? I heard you had these two coins of a type of a team or a company or startup at that point that you're looking for. But at a certain point, where's the line to where it's really opinionated and it can be objective?
I think there is no such thing as a safe investment.
Of course.
Right? Unless you want to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and even that, right, may not be as safe anymore as it used
Probably
to be.
Not.
So we already know we're taking risk, but again, we're calculating risk, and we're constantly stacking the odds in our favor. So at this stage of where we are, I get, on a bad day, 50 decks a day, on a good day, 125,
right,
and anywhere in between. So I'm on the radar. Unicorn is on the radar. I've been written up all over French press and foreign press, et cetera. So we get a lot of deal flow, which allows us to, build some quick filters as to what we're not interested in versus what we're interested in. And usually, out of 100 decks that we get, there are 5 that we'll take a serious look at. And out of those 5, there's probably going to be a half that we'll actually do, right? Because of the constant deal flow that we're getting. So there's a quick, rather than focusing first on the deal that I'd be interested in, I would first put away the false positives and say, this is not the deal that I would be looking for. And typically they all have a similar anatomy where the founder or the founding team comes to us and makes some extravagant claims like, we're tapping into a $100 billion industry. Within the next 3 years, we're going to own 5% market share, without actually giving you an inkling of an idea as to how they're going to do it. So initially, I used to probe these people a little bit, give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's just a waste of time, because you have to sift through the number of applications that you get on a daily basis to drill down to the ones that really know what the heck they're doing, right? But in terms of how we decide what to get involved in, so assuming obviously we're looking at each deal from a financial perspective. I have a CFA, certified financial analyst, that's a partner of mine, has been for 20 or some odd years. If it passes through his filter, it eventually will land on my desk.
Gatekeeper.
Yeah, it's more than a gatekeeper. He's a very sharp gatekeeper, right? So he's the lion at the gate,
nice
probably.
To the gatekeeper.
That's right. Assuming it lands on my desk, the first thing I look at is, assuming everybody has done the proper checks, how quickly can we have an impact on what this company is trying to build? And usually what that boils down to is customer acquisition and scalability of what it is that they do. So let's take an example, because we do this quite often in the mobile app space. Let's say someone has developed a promising mobile app, has real product market fit. They're really trying to solve a problem that's not been addressed yet in the market. And they've been able to show us some early traction. They get a few thousand downloads without even spending a dime.
What's a few thousand downloads?
Retention
What's a few thousand?
A few thousand downloads of a mobile app, for example. How many you mean?
In relevance, if you're using it as a filter.
I'd say 1,000 to 5,000 downloads, and let's say they're retaining 15% of those past 30 days. That is something that for me would look intriguing. And we've taken some of these concepts and put them through the incubator and the accelerator, and taken them from 1,000 downloads in some cases to 1 million plus within 6 to 8 months. Right? So that's the acceleration effect. But first, we typically don't touch anything that doesn't have at least an early proof of concept, right? So if you have a product or service, at least show us that it is ready to be marketed and that you've actually already tried in some sense, right? Some people may have purchased it or even used it for free. If you're raising money, prove to me that at least your grandmother trusted you and put some bucks in your company, right? Before you come to knock on my door, right? Get some validation, right? It's very important whether you pitch me or anybody else, trust me. So if you're looking to raise money via an angel investor, first of all, if you go straight to VC at an early stage, Forget it. You're wasting your time. No VC they can't help you, right? Because they want to scale. They have to allocate large sums. You already have to have significant traction before they actually pay attention to you. So basically,
unless you're a rock star
you have two concrete. Yeah, exactly. You have two concrete options at the seed stage: crowdfunding or angel investing, right? If you do anything else, you're pretty much losing your time and wasting somebody else's time as well. Those are the two valid options.
Right. No, you're totally right. And I think like when we're talking about getting these early, you mentioned like, for example, you said, you want to see like, for example, your grandma, you sold this at least to your grandma or somebody that you care about closely. And it's like, that's an interesting thing because based off of, social backgrounds or financial backgrounds and things like that kind of connect in certain countries or nations or whatever it may be. There are certain people who don't have that background where they can have that awesome access to that type of capital, right? Not everybody can get that access to capital from their grandma and get it, or even have a house. Poor kid who doesn't have that opportunity. How does somebody like that, or how do you even, include someone of that, of that facility or that direction? Excuse me.
No, I get it. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, some of us are more privileged than others, unfortunately, and that's a fact. So most of us speaking here have, a higher chance, a higher likelihood of raising that money. That being said, there are more and more startups popping up all over the place, everywhere, right? India, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, et cetera, right? That's actually where more grit is required. More hustle is required in order to make it work, right? And some of the most successful entrepreneurs come from those regions where, if you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth, your chances of failure are a lot higher because you're going to give up a lot sooner because you're not accustomed to actually feeling that pain. If that pain is deeply ingrained in your DNA, well, you're going to care, right? So, for example, I happen to own the local rugby team here, which is a semi-pro rugby team, and I have 7 rugby players that work for me. And the reason why I like these guys is because it's the pain game. It's American football without the pads. That's rugby, right? I have one guy in particular. If I don't hit him over the head once a day, he comes into my office and thinks there's something wrong with me.
Right.
I'm not kidding, right? Now we have social distancing going on. I had to explain to him, look, I can't give you a gentle tap over the head because it's not a good example. But these are guys that just get knocked down since they were 5 or 6 years old. They've felt the pain, and they actually, if I ask them to stay until midnight or 1 a.m. because we get a big project going on, it's like, hey, no problem. Can we order some pizza? Right? That's it. So going back to your kid growing up growing up poor. Yes, he's going to have more challenges in order to make it happen, but at the same time, he's also can overcome that lack of early stage financing with extra grit, extra hustle, and we're seeing more and more of them become successful, and sometimes wildly so.
Right. And I just wonder, like, also, is there like other resources or things like that probably you involved yourself into, where you even help those odds for those people who may not have that advantage, and then like. I guess also there is another example of, somebody, or there's a couple people that are pretty, upper middle class who, became very successful entrepreneurs, right? And we use their platforms daily. For example, if we want to go into Snapchat, Evan Spiegel's father, he was a prominent lawyer in, the LA area. And I think his mother too as well. He went to Stanford.
And he's got French citizenship. He lives in France.
I'm pretty sure he can get any citizenship right about now.
Yeah, but he opted for French citizenship. He's a French citizen.
Is he?
Now.
That's wow. Why is that?
He just loved France ever since at an early age. So he kind of grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, right? So he got to travel. Yeah. He had
an expensive allowance.
He lives most of the time. Most of his life he spends in Paris now.
Wow. And then you also have another guy like, I think everybody even knows, Mark Zuckerberg. He grew up in a modest, upper middle class, family. I would say it's upper middle class. His father was a dentist. I think the mother was mental or some type of psychologist. He went to really great schools. it kind of set them up. I would almost say for success, even though it's not so obvious because not everybody is, right? But if you already have that drive, that energy, that motivation, in your DNA, and then also around you, you're the average of the 5 most people that you hang around with the most. I think that energy just kind of like, it kind of sometimes snowballs, right? It is a different type of like access if you do have that foundation, right?
No question. Yeah.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think what I've seen in my career is that you need to have high EQ,
Right.
hustle, and decent IQ, right? That's a good ratio versus the other way
Right.
around. I'd rather take that for an entrepreneur as a super high IQ and very low EQ.
Right.
It's not a good recipe. Now, if you're a high IQ guy, a low EQ guy, or vice versa, you got to plug that hole, fill the hole, by basically adding complementary skill sets to your team, right? And team building. Look, if you're looking to build an amazing entrepreneurial venture, you have to think about team building early on.
Right.
Because you cannot scale without the right team in place. It's impossible.
Right.
You cannot be continuing to be as a lone wolf, a solo entrepreneur, and intend to build. Yes, you can be a great artist and impact 2 billion people who listen to your songs, for example. No problem there. But as a business, Jeff Bezos is not running a one-man show.
No.
Right? Let's be clear. So you have to think about what that team looks like, and basically I call it puzzle building. You're building a puzzle.
Right.
The last piece I need on that puzzle is another me because I'm already there. I cannot put myself in that spot twice. Right. When I have a gaping hole left or right, that gaping hole could be sales and marketing, it could be engineering, it could be customer support, it could be graphic design, it could be legal, legal. Who knows what it is? So you really have to be able to visualize what that team will look like 3-5 years from now, assuming you succeed. And that's the only assumption you can make. Otherwise, you're driving yourself nuts, right? If you're planning, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right. Yeah, that is valid. And I think I kind of want to, touch on this again too as well. Like, I've lived in Silicon Valley, I work in tech, done the startup game, done pretty much most of the stuff that you would consider trendy here in Silicon Valley. Not to be trendy, but just because of passion and love. And I'm just a creative person in general, as since a kid, always hacking stuff, right? And I think like for most of the entrepreneurs that I've met, and I've met a lot, I've met a lot, definitely for sure. The David Saxes, the Evan Spiegels. I literally met Evan Spiegel at TechCrunch Disrupt. I think it was around 2012, and like he gave a speech about Snapchat, and he was walking around, and afterwards, after he got off the stage, and then he was just like, normally at things like TechCrunch or any big tech event with rock star CEOs, and they get bombarded by other techies or other entrepreneurs who want to talk to them and get some type of connection or whatever it may be, or energy or whatever from that individual. And I just remember afterwards he was just standing there by himself, and like literally I didn't see people running up to him like everybody else. Everybody was waiting for like Drew Housing from Dropbox and guys like that, right? But he was just standing by himself. I remember I just like walked over to him because I felt like, man, nobody's running up to this guy. I think he got like a million users. I think at the time he had 1 million users. So I just walked over to him and said, hey man, congratulations on the app. It's obviously going to do something pretty well. And he was like, hey, thanks, man. And that was pretty much it. Because then I saw Drew Housing walk out, and I was like, oh, I gotta go. And but it's funny. Because even at that stage, it didn't seem like a lot of people believed that it was going to be something, even at that point. Even he proved that he had traction to an extent, it still wasn't so confident. I know in the market at the time, it was really just like, if you're going into social, what about Facebook? It's going to swallow you alive. Don't do it. And I think that's on mostly any social product. A lot of investors are were very afraid to go in or invest into that market. Unless you have some street cred to do that.
No, very much so. I mean, some of them are approachable, some of them are less so, right? I've had my fair share of encounters with people way before they became big in the space, and I've also had my fair share of employees who actually ended up making it really big after leaving my company,
right,
and starting their own ventures, where I was their provider first. Then, to a certain case, we became a supplier to them later on, and still have a lot of those dynamics that are still working today. Former employees that are either clients of ours today or vice versa.
Yeah.
So interesting how tables can turn, and not in a bad way, right? The same way I started out as an entrepreneur mostly. Now I'm more on the investment side and more on the provisioning side. So, but I think on that note, fortunately today we have more and more real entrepreneurs in the digital space, in the tech space, who started ventures, had some successful exits, who are now actually providing the capital, the mentoring, and the support to younger entrepreneurs. When I started in 1993 in the tech space, it didn't even exist, right? You couldn't rely on anyone because it hadn't been done before. It was brand new. I was selling websites in 93, 94 when people didn't even know what a website was.
That had to be challenging.
Selling ISO.
How was that during that time?
Very challenging. Well, it taught me one thing about persistence and grit, because I came up with the rule, what I call the rule of 36/1. Mm-hmm. Basically, I had to contact 35 people, physically speak to 35 people before I could sell a website. But the first 200 phone calls, I sold none. Mm-hmm. So people would say, a website, what the heck is that? Right? I'm talking 93, 94. Right. And for those who had heard of it, they usually used to say, well, this internet thing is here today, gone tomorrow, total fad. Click, right, et cetera, et cetera. So, but what it taught me is that, look, in order to succeed, you have to be willing to put up with a lot of failures, because I literally failed 95% of the time, and I ended up selling that business for 7 figures a few years later, right? So it was worth the failure.
I think so. I think a lot of people can agree with you on that. You can turn around and flip that money.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what Michael Jordan said. It's like, look, I took a lot of shots, but I missed more than I made, right? So yet I'm or baseball. Baseball is even more so, right, for batters.
Right.
I mean, what's your batting average? Can you imagine if you had a batting average of 50 or over, right? Hey, you have 30. You're a freaking superstar, which means you're missing 7 out of 10.
I think that's interesting. What you brought up really, which was like, and not to interrupt that, I just wanted to chime in on something. Is that something that you said, which is, the model of an angel investor and, different, versus a VC, and how they kind of, I guess, filter out who they're trying to invest in. And it's a very similar model, because I've worked in both industries, the entertainment industry, and then also the tech industry. And what I've always noticed is that they're very similar when you look at the models when it comes to investing, right? So when you're looking at let's go look at it to a point of like even a musician or an artist, right, who's trying to get signed to a major label like an Interscope, et cetera. Typically, the model is very similar, where it's like, hey, you have this traction, right? And that traction usually, it normally connects to things like, social media, engagement and things like that, downloads, things like that, which all correlate with traction when you come into the tech world. It's very similar, type of like mindset when it comes to filtering and investing. And all record labels basically do is invest, right? And put that money into the artist.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I guess Justin Bieber was one of the first superstars that picked off of YouTube, right? So, I mean, obviously he had traction. He was on radar. They saw the trend going up, and that's how they picked him up, right? Unlike Marshall Mathers back in the days, Eminem, right? Who just got lucky because I think he was on Power 106 or whatever it was, and Dre was driving down the 405, or at least that's the story, and heard him and called in the station and said, I want to meet this kid, bring him into my studio tomorrow. Right. So the times have really changed, because back then you actually had to listen to the radio and be on the radio. Now you can just proactively search for anything. So if you're searching for projects that do have traction, in 10 seconds you'll find them right now via Google, YouTube, or any other tools. So it's a lot easier these days to detect talent.
But it's also noisier.
Well, talk about that. I mean, that's very easy to comprehend, right? Because when I started in the tech business in the early 90s, it was extremely expensive to launch a tech
Yes.
business. In 1998, my monthly bandwidth bill was $8,000.
Wow.
And I was using 800 times less bandwidth than I'm using today, and today it's free, right? In 99, 2000, if you wanted to launch an e-commerce website, you needed to have an Oracle server license for your database. That would set you back per instance $32,000. So if you actually wanted to launch a business, unless you raised $500,000 or $1 million, you had no point being in business, right? Today, it costs you nothing.
Right.
As a result of costing nothing, everyone is your competitor at the same time. So you have to differentiate yourself in a different manner. Back then, the barrier of entry was so high that unless you could raise money, you were nobody.
Right.
Today, you don't have to do that anymore. With a few tools, with grandma's pocket change, going back to grandma, you can actually launch a business, right? You can have a mic like the one you have in front of you. If you don't have the money, you can beg, borrow, okay, and get one, or put it on a credit card if you have a credit card.
These are the facts.
Or sell a Bitcoin, that you bought 10 years ago.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple of buddies who actually made a lot of money off of the whole Bitcoin surge, right? I've got a lot of buddies that became, instant millionaires, because of Bitcoin. So, and also there's their resilience and their, intelligence and just being there, focusing on the right thing at the right time. Sometimes that's it.
Well, in this case, you had to focus on the right thing at the right time. Buy a Bitcoin 10 years ago, and you'll do fine. Buy 100 10 years ago.
That is correct. That is very correct. It's really interesting. So I guess I want to ask you too as well. Like, what encouraged you to be an investor, right? Because you could have done a lot of things. You could be just sitting in France on on a nice boat, going to Ibiza with you and your wife and having a great time and just retiring.
Yeah, that's never been my style, and actually, but I do remind my employees, my staff here once in a while. Look, I'll need to be here, right? But you do, and I'm here for a reason, right? So what motivates me most these days is way different than what motivated me early in my career. Is the ability to actually contribute to younger entrepreneurs' success, but only the right type. Right? The guys that really want to change the world, really want to have an impact, really are ready to roll up the sleeves and give it all, right? The guys that want to have it easy and just chill and whatnot, I have no interest whatsoever, right? But there are a lot of very deserving people who are getting into this to solve real fundamental problems, and we have a lot of them still today in the health sector, clean tech, you name it, fintech, digital divide, global wealth inequality. So those some of the things that resonate with me, where I really want to be the exclamation point in terms of what they want to achieve by helping them, giving them the right types of resources.
Right. And that's also a great question, a great thing that you mentioned, which is like, solving a real problem. And I know there's just like this interesting conversation that I even heard, and I think being a person who's an entrepreneur and also a builder and a creative person in general, is that, when you're designing things, as I heard it, you're always creating new problems, right? So you don't actually solve completely a problem, right? When you solve a problem, you create other problems, right? And of course, those are open the landscape for new opportunities, right? And jobs and things like that for whatever the market or whatever you're doing. So it's just like always interesting. It's like when we mention like solving a problem, it's like we are solving a problem. We're also creating additional problems when we have different things of certain companies now that do certain things that may be intrusive with data and different things like that might be high topics of our time right now. Some intentionally, some unintentionally, and some just to think that they're making the product better for the human race in general, right? But I don't know. It's a sticky thing. What do you think?
I think as a rule of thumb, technology has always been a double-edged sword and always will be. You can save the world, you can destroy the world. If you look at weaponry, you can defend a country or a species, and you can absolutely destroy it. depending on how you use it.
Right.
So a lot of debate today about artificial intelligence and other technologies becoming intrusive and becoming dangerous. But it all depends how you deploy them, right? So, for example, if we're looking at COVID right now, think about COVID even 5 years ago. There's no way, shape, or form will we have come up with a vaccine within a 6-month period of time. 5 years ago, it would have taken us 5 years to do that. So, the advances in technology are, if you look back, for example, I like to remind people where we actually started. People are saying, oh my God, it's getting worse and worse and worse. No, it's not. Go back 500 years and look at how people lived. Like, you had a common cold, you'd be laying out in the street and you'd be dying, right? That's one example. Or you'd walk down the street in a medieval place or anywhere else, somebody would throw, a piss pot right over your head, right? Now we have plumbing. We get. I mean, think of it. You die of anything. If you go back to 1900, we're only talking 120 years ago. The human life expectancy in the Western world was 38.
Right.
You know what I mean? So think about how far we've come. I would have been long gone, right? We wouldn't be talking today. But people tend to forget that because they didn't experience it, and the human mind plays tricks on us. It tends to focus on the negative versus the positive.
Right.
But we've come, technology is not new. It didn't just start, right? The world is still here today. Of course, there are still dangers. But if you compare, for example, if you just look at the number of crazies, dictators around the world that are still here, that number is going down every single year. There are less and less. We still have a few, but if you look at that number versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, it's gone down, 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 down. Our quality of life keeps on increasing. Our longevity keeps on increasing. Our ability to deal with diseases, living a healthier, longer lifespan keeps on increasing. So overall, it's an uptrend. Don't let yourself be fooled. Turn off CNN.
So what do you think about that? That's interesting that you brought that up too as well. You brought up a lot of interesting things, by the way, but you just said that, technology, has also lessened dictatorships. So in what ways do you think, or what tools or products do you feel have,
Well, the
diminished that flow?
first thing, and that's a fact, you can look it up, you can Google it. There is research that shows that once GDP per capita in any country in the world crosses $10,000 US, which is not a tremendous amount, that's roughly $800 a month per person, that no dictatorship has ever survived. Which basically means that once you're actually giving people what they really need as humans, which means shelter, food, clothing, relative access to education,
Basic needs,
and a decent way of life, automatically the dictators fall by the wayside, right? Once they become smarter as well. So that's very empowerment. That's very, very, very powerful, to think about that. And so did you know that the only way actually to get rid of still the dictators that we have around today is by continuing on that same trend. So economic growth is a great thing, is what's gotten us to where we are today, right? Now, does it have a downside? Is there pollution? Does it potentially relate to global warming? Of course, right? But if we didn't have it, where would we be living today, right? I'm a true blue capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe that capitalism, yes, needs to be also kept in check, kept into control, right? But which way should we go? The way of Cuba, the way of Venezuela, right? Those are clearly failed systems that we should not replicate.
Right.
And then when every once in a while when something goes wrong, like right now with COVID, everybody's pointing, oh my God, to the bad capitalists, forgetting that we actually got to this point, and the reason why, for example, we already have a vaccine today is thanks to capitalism and in free markets. If you didn't have those, it just wouldn't exist. Venezuela didn't come up with the vaccine. Cuba didn't come up with the vaccine. Russia claimed they came up with the vaccine, right? Maybe, maybe not. Bottom line is we're all better off today than we were 500 years ago. We're all better off today than we were 50 or 100 years ago.
I agree 100%. And I think we kind of take for granted things, or maybe not even take for granted. Maybe it's the fact of, your surroundings, right? If your baseline is, more privileged than the rest of the previous generations, you may not share that empathy, right? I think it's just like out of sight, out of mind, right? Maybe we just don't realize these things or care because they're not the baseline that we start or that our previous generation started off versus what we are. So we don't look at those things as these barriers or these privileges. We look at these things as this is our baseline. This is what we see. This is normal. I don't care about what I don't necessarily, haven't experienced, right?
100%. If you start out as a housewife OOC, obviously, you don't tend to lose track really quick. It's kind of difficult to understand what was going on, even yesterday, let alone 500 years ago.
Right. I mean, I think like empathy for what others are, going through, I think it just gets lost. It gets lost when you don't experience it, and it's just like people they seem to typically tribally, empathize with based on what's within their area, right, or within their experience of area, right, in general. And I think that's where this distance of empathy and mentality of compassion of what others have been through or through previous generations and taking and you end up taking things for granted. And I think that is exactly where humans in general kind of screw up, is not actually being very, how would you say it? Being very, what is the exact word I'm looking for? I would say being very grateful, right? If that's the best way to say it, being very grateful for what you have, right?
Yeah, in terms of being grateful, I think what you need to have is you need to have perspective, right? So, and you also need to give yourself that perspective. Otherwise, you cannot distinguish between yourself, between the haves and the have-nots, between the healthy and the sick, et cetera, right? So if you've traveled, if you're privileged, go to a poor country in Africa, for example, or Southeast Asia. Go to the slums in the Philippines and see what's going on. Maybe that kind of a culture shock will actually make you wake up and say, you know what? I thought I had problems, right? Look at these guys, right? And maybe what can I do right now? And that's usually what happens.
Right.
Is you need some kind of a mental electroshock to actually realize how fortunate you are, how grateful you should be, so that you can actually do something to help those in need.
No, that's really interesting, man. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, and it's Connecticut, right? And I remember as a child, I visited areas that weren't so financially privileged, and just staying there for a couple of days scared the stuff out of me, right? And I was like, whoa, who would want to live like this? Oh my God, I want to get out of here. This is wild. How can people just survive in this type of environment? And it's just it's different when it's all right? And it's you can come in and start saying, hey, look, this is the way things should be, and this is how you should do this, and why are you doing this? But your rationale may not match with that rationale of what someone's baseline as far as their lifestyle and culture may be a norm, right? So you can come in and start bringing these awesome ideas, but they may not resonate with the culture or the environment that has been baseline into that that radius, right? So for me, what I've learned is how you were raised and who you're surrounding yourself around matters most. And even if you're just you can do it through books, right? You can do it through books. You can get out of your zone by just reading positive books. That also affects your surroundings and your mentality. And I think when I was little, I grew up around, I don't know if you know P.T. Barnum, but so I grew up around his one of my best friends was his great grandson, James Barnum. And I remember when I was a kid in Bridgeport, Connecticut, when actually, we had a school field trip, and there was a lot of things named after him. And I remember there was a statue that we went to on a school trip. And but I originally grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. But I remember when we went to Bridgeport, there was a statue, and me and James in the school, we were and other fellow classmates. There was a statue of P.T. Barnum, looking out towards the ocean. And I remember I was like, what the heck? This guy's been gone for 100 years. And there's a statue of him still here. How wild is that? It's perspective, because this guy failed a lot. He was one of the original, of many startup founders. I consider the greatest show on earth as a startup, right? And different people like Michael Jackson, who also use PT as a foundation to produce or to entertain people. Michael Jackson always wanted to do the greatest show on earth, and that was partially because of P.T. Barnum, and which is why he had like animals and things like that, which a lot of people don't know. And circus, and it's like almost like circus, like amusement park in his house and things like that. The Neverland Ranch was really because of P.T. Barnum. A lot of people don't know that, but that's a lot of where it came from. But yeah, I think it's interesting, very interesting.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, man, I don't know. I think investments. Where do you think AI is going right now? What do you see the future of AI?
I think, what we're seeing is AI emerging with 5G and AR, VR become one technology versus three. I think that in the very near future, we're no longer going to be using the term AI the same way we're no longer saying search on the internet, but we're saying to Google, right? So I think it's moving so fast, and I also think that the concept of runaway AI is a flawed concept, which basically assumes, wrongly so, that on one side you have AI, on the other side you have humans, when in fact we're merging. And we're quickly merging to the point where within the next 10 to 15 years we'll get to what some people call the singularity, which is the actual merger of human biology with technology, where we're actually becoming one. We'll have to ask ourselves a lot of fundamental questions on the way there, ethical questions, philosophical questions, but ultimately there is no way we're going to hold this back. It is happening already, and it will happen even more so over the next few years as these technologies mature. I
agree with you, man. I think humans, we have these biases, right? And it's like, even when you look at things like, and I think people could go back and forth on this, but when you look at things like, police, judges, legal systems, our government, maybe in the future, AI will be our government, our lawyers, our police. I just think it's inevitable.
Yeah, they're probably less flawed than what we have in place right now, right? At least they won't make any arbitrary decisions. They'll make logical decisions.
I agree with you, but then there's probably others like Elon who would say we might need to shut it down a little bit or monitor it, right?
Well, it's kind of like for me, as he's probably proved the contrary. It's for him, it's a way of thwarting or trying to thwart the competition. He's not usually a good role model when it actually comes to saying something and not doing it himself.
Yeah, that's very true, because he's using that for the Tesla cars and vehicles and things like that, and I think it is contradictory. Yeah, for sure, it totally is. Totally,
very much so.
Love the guy, but definitely is contradictory for sure. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, man. So, I think what's next for you? What are some of the things that are next for you when it comes to you investing? What's the next 5 years looking like?
Next 5 years, we're basically looking at scaling what we've started already with the incubator, the accelerator. And on that note, we're hosting the Startup Supercup, which is a World Cup for startups here in our town, Sala, October 1, 2, 3 of 2021. It will bring together roughly 1,000 angel investors and funds, between 100 and 120 tech startups, a lot of media, over 100 media outlets. We'll have a grand winner. We'll have specific category prize winners. But basically, what we're looking to do is we're looking to attract and build a strong ecosystem in a rural area, which has really not been done so far. We started way before COVID. COVID has significantly accelerated that pace. Young startup entrepreneurs and older ones that no longer want to be in big cities, but want to go have a better way of life in a place where you can really enjoy yourself while at the same time building a quality startup. So we're probably an option for you if you're in that scenario. A pretty viable option, actually.
Wow, that's awesome. So one thing I'd also like to ask is, you have a beautiful wife from, who's Vietnamese, right? And how did you meet your wife?
In LA, at the gym.
Oh, okay. So she wasn't
when she was still a student.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. What was she studying?
Medicine. She's a doctor. Chinese medicine and acupuncture.
What kind of intrigued you guys to connect? You were a startup guy, investor. You know, she's in a different space.
Different space. I had seen her a few times. She had seen me a few times. We introduced each other. You know, one thing led to another. You know, when, you know, I asked one guy if he knew that girl, and he said, yeah, but forget it. Everybody tried. Everybody tried to go to dinner with her or whatnot. So it's really
It
intriguing
wasn't
me,
happening.
and nobody had succeeded. So that's where the competitors set in. You know,
You didn't listen to it as a founder and an entrepreneur. You said, "Hey, my resilience is going to win. I'm going to try. I'm going to fail, but I might try."
I look at it as a problem to solve. I have a binary brain.
There you go. I definitely have the same. That's very true. And you have a daughter too as well, living out in LA. Is she in tech?
She's getting into tech, in pet tech, you know, so she's dabbling. She's a huge dog fan. Has her own dog. Was growing up, going through school, etc. Like was dog sitting, and still does it to a certain extent. But she's actually launching her own startup in that space, in the dog sitting space.
Awesome, amazing. And one last thing I'd like to touch on is what would you, if you have to tell, a lot of the, younger individuals or anybody in general in the workforce, what would you tell them as far as like, the job area they should focus on for the future?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think what the piece of advice I would give is prepare for uncertainty and know that everything you've come to know as being true is about to be challenged. So you have to really think outside the box. Don't let anybody put you inside a box, because you cannot think outside a box when you're in a box, right? Keep your options open. Be extremely flexible by mind, open to new ideas, because things are moving so fast, right, on the technology front, that what's true today is no longer going to be true tomorrow, and no one has the crystal ball, right? The other thing I would say is, if you're looking to build a business in this space, instead of trying to trend chase a new trend, for me that's the loser's game, right? Yes, you may succeed, but it's extremely difficult because none of us can predict the future, myself included. However, what we can predict is the past, because it's happened already. And what I mean by that is, try to focus on things that do not change and build a business on that, rather than chasing a new trend. So for example, try to focus. Tomorrow we're all going to get up, or today, depending on what time zone you're in, we're going to get up, we're going to take a shower, we're going to brush our teeth, we're going to eat, we're going to put some clothes on, we want to be entertained, we want to be educated, etc. Think about ways of how you can actually make those experiences more enjoyable, more frictionless. If you see a problem and it bothers you, solve that problem, because more than likely you're not the first and the only one to face it, right? I'll leave you with this thought. If you want to be a billionaire, help a billion people, and the money will come on its own way.
Right. I think that touches into.
But that's what I mean.
That kind of touches into. Sorry about that. That touches into. You get paid based off of the size of the problem you're solving, right?
Yeah. Impact. It's all about impact. And impact is not always monetary, right? It can come in many ways. If you see an older lady struggling across the street, help her. It's amazing what that'll do for you, right? In just terms of your self-esteem, right? Like a random act of kindness, right? You're going to feel that reward physically, and it's really going to make you a better person. It's going to make you perform at a higher level, and ultimately it's going to make you more happy, because you just did something that you didn't have to do. You went out and did it anyway. You made a person happy, right? And that's going to just reverberate inside of you. Doesn't have to be financial.
Wow, definitely. Awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to point out or say, or to the people out there?
Hey, anybody needs any advice, or needs some help or guidance, you can find me on LinkedIn, Dom Einhorn, D-O-M. Last name is E-I-N-H-O-R-N. Website is unicornincubator.com. That's unicorn with a Q. My direct email is dom@unicornincubator.com. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Amazing. I actually saw you, chiming in on one of the threads on LinkedIn as well. I was like, hey, that's okay. Awesome. I'm going to be talking to this guy. So it's awesome to, put two and two together. But I think the key takeaways that I gathered from most of the convo is to be resilient as a person in general. and go towards any adversity. Those are some of the key attributes that you actually want to take along with yourself throughout life in general, which will be highly valuable to you in the future, no matter what. And always have these dual type of personalities when you're building a team, right? Or these complementary personalities with a team in general, if you want to get that funding and be that hustler and things like that. And really, if you want to find a beautiful wife, go to the gym, keep yourself fit and healthy, and be resilient in that same space, and you might just look up, right? And train, and think about technology in the future. When you're talking about a career move, always think about being able to be flexible, right? No matter what comes towards you, be flexible. Be passionate, be resilient. Embrace the future, embrace change, and always look for holes of where you can succeed and improve things on and make the world a better place. And almost be a humanitarian. So I think those are key attributes or takeaways of what you've kind of drawn a picture for people in general. And I think it's a great message, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, the Kids in the Room podcast, and we'll stay tuned and we'll definitely keep in touch. I'll definitely add you on LinkedIn, and I wish you the best on the journey.
Thanks for having me.
Always.
Pleasure.